Back when I was a teenager, there was an election. I think it was Clinton versus Bush. That probably gives away the date a little bit. But I was bored. My little brother was bored, as were our friends. And so we took my mom's 1987 Chevy station wagon and we started driving around town. And we had this brilliant idea that we were going to collect up political signs from people's yards and put them all over the car. And some of you are thinking right now, oh no, he was one of those kids, because you've had it happen to you and you don't like it very much. So we did. We drove around town, we put the signs, it wasn't a whole bunch of them, we put the signs on the car, and we thought it was super, super awesome. And then my brother and my friends had the idea, like, hey, let's start egging cars, it'll be super fun. So we're driving around and they're throwing exit cars as we go, and they hit this car, and I pulled down this side street, and they came around and cut us off coming the other way. So far, so good? You're like, no, so far, so horrible. This is the worst story I've ever heard in a sermon. And so there I am, like 17 years old, and there's this kid from high school, and he's super mad, and he came and he punches the hood of my mom's car, and then takes off, and we're like, all right, that's fine. And then the cops show up. And when the cops come, they're like, oh, you guys have been stealing political, not you guys. You, the driver of this car, have been stealing political signs. And so they arrested me, brought me to the police station. This is my first time arrested. Just the first time. And they charged me with larceny. I don't even know what larceny was. There was no Google. Like how back then, what do you do? I had to like look it up, ask some friends or whatever. But I got charged with larceny. My mom found out about it, of course. And so she goes into the police station and she's like, well, this is my son, da-da-da-da. And talked my way out of it. She would always drop her cousin, whose name is Tommy Kelly. If anyone's watching from Massachusetts, they know that it's true. And she's like, well, my cousin Tommy Kelly, I can't tell you how many times my mom's cousin Tommy Kelly got me out of trouble when I was a teenager. But I got out of it. She talked my way out of it, and it was done. Or so I thought. Then I enlisted in the Marines. When I enlisted in the Marines, this is all true, by the way. I enlisted in the Marines, and in the very beginning, like on the first day, they want to know all the stuff that you ever did. And so you've already been screamed at for, I don't know, you've been awake for like 48 hours or whatever, and you've been screamed at pretty much the entire time. And you go into this room, and there's a major in there, like a JAG or whatever he is, and says, put your heads down on the desk. So everyone has their heads down on the desk. And then they start railing into you. You better tell us every single thing you ever did, every single time you ever got in trouble, every time you had contact with the police. And they're screaming and they're going. And my head's down, but this kid's hand goes up and he goes, what? What did you do? And this kid says, when I was 14 years old, I stole $5 from my mom's purse. And then he's like, get your head back down. And he screams at him. And then people start rattling off like the stuff that they did when they were kids. They want to get every single thing out of you at that point. Did you ever do any drugs? Did you ever smoke marijuana? Just like the list goes on and on and on, right? I did in that moment. I had my head down. I kind of peeked out of my eye a little bit, and I marked that kid. I was like, that dude's a snitch. I'm going to stay away from him. It is true. But it was so stressful in that moment. They're saying, like, you're going to go to the brig, you're going to get a bad conduct discharge, or you're going to get a dishonorable discharge, and threatening you with every single thing that they possibly can to scare you into telling the truth in that moment. And I still didn't tell the truth. I'm not a snitch, right? Definitely not going to snitch on myself. But what happened then, from that point onward, for the next 10 years, because of the job that I had to have a secret security clearance. So they go back through and they check that stuff. And some of you know exactly what I'm talking about because you had this experience. I was so stressed about it for 10 years solid. It wasn't just that. There was other stuff, and it got worse progressively as I went along too. But I was so stressed about it for 10 solid years. I'd wake up in the middle of the night like with the anxiety and everything else. And the reality is this, that when we sin and when we do things our own way that go against God's ways, there are natural repercussions for it because God tells us to do things not because he wants to be a mean taskmaster, but because he loves us and he knows what's best for us. If I hadn't sinned in the first place, I would have avoided 10 years of stress and anxiety and the negativity that comes with it. We think of God as this guy up in the sky with a gray beard that has rules so that he can see if we're going to follow them or not. And when we don't follow them, he comes after us and he has consequences for us. The reality is this: the world has consequences for our sin. They're natural consequences, and that's why it is sin in the first place, because it goes against the way of how God created things, which are perfect in how he always intended it to be. "35 years later, I can finally talk about this openly." Like this stuff, it was really traumatic for me. Like I thought, like as an officer, I'm like, they're gonna find out about this, they're gonna find out about this, and I don't know what's gonna happen at this point. And in a very small way, it was part of my reason for starting in the direction of getting out of the Marines. But there really are consequences for our sin and the things that go against how God has told us how to do things. And this includes idol worship, which isn't always as blatant as putting a statue up in your living room with some incense. But when we start to create idols, whatever those might look like in our lives, whether we're escaping through it or anything else, there are real life consequences to setting up those idols. And oftentimes we don't even know we've set up the idols, but we're still reaping the consequences, and we don't understand why. And so today, if you have your Bible, we're going to look in Judges 6. And we see this in the story of Gideon, but we see this throughout the history of Israel and really the history of God's people for all time, that as we engage with the world, we start to synchronize or syncretize the stuff of the world, and the worldly worship practices or the worship practices outside of the kingdom of God start to seep in to what we do as the people of God. And we talked about this last week. And we see this with the Midianites. Israel, even though they were being treated very poorly by the Midianites, through syncretism, they took on some of the practices, and they actually started to worship the god Baal, putting up altars to Baal and raising up Asherah poles. And in Judges 6, this is the situation that they find themselves in. The Israelites did this with the Egyptians. They did this with the Greeks. They did this with the Babylonians. Throughout history, this is what happens. You know, we're talking about thousands of years. It's not like they did this all in like a week. Over a thousands of year period, the stuff of the world starts to creep in, and it pollutes the worship how God intended for it to be. And so in this story, that's where we find ourselves with Gideon. Verse 13 in chapter 6 says this: "When the angel of the Lord," actually I'm going to skip 12 for now. "Pardon me, my Lord," Gideon replied, "but if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, 'Did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt? But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian.'" He didn't even know. I mean, there you're going to see here in a moment that his father had an altar to Baal established with an Asherah pole standing up right next to it. And Gideon still didn't get it. But fortunately here, in the writer of Judges makes us aware, and we're going to start in verse 7 here, and it gives us some context to what was going on and what the problem was. When the Israelites cried out to the Lord because of Midian, he sent them a prophet who said, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I brought you up out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. I rescued you from the hand of the Egyptians." See, what he's doing, what's happening here is this comes beforehand, right? The writer of Judges is saying, this is the problem. And then later on, Gideon is saying, "Lord, what's the problem?" because we're not seeing these signs and wonders like we used to. Where are you in all this? And they actually go together. I rescued you from the hand of the Egyptians, and I delivered you from the hand of all your oppressors. I drove them out before you and gave you their land. I said to you, I am the Lord your God. Do not worship the gods of the Amorites in whose land you live, but you have not listened to me. Right away, before even getting into the story, the author of Judges lays out what the problem is. The problem is, Israel, it's not that God isn't for you anymore. The problem is that you are worshiping the gods that I told you not to worship, and you don't even know it. Why has this happened? And again, sometimes we have to, when things are going a little bit awry in our lives, we can come to God and we can ask him sometimes. The reality is this: sometimes it's just because the world's broken. I'm not saying like everything that we do is because of sin in our lives or we're worshiping something that we shouldn't be worshiping. I'm not saying that. But sometimes it is. And so that's part of this relational aspect in abiding in Jesus, is that as we walk this out with him, he starts to show us this stuff. Because sometimes he's going to show us, yeah, we are doing something that's a little bit awry, and that's what is bringing the consequences into our life. And other times he'll show us, no, this is just something natural. Just stick with me, and he's going to take care of it. But it depends on this closeness that we have with him. We reap the repercussions of sin naturally. And I think this is really important for us to understand and to hear, is that it is sin because it's bad for us. Does that make sense? Sometimes we think that it's bad for us because it's sin, but no, it's actually sin because it's bad for us. God called it out and said, don't do this stuff because it's actually bad for you. And this is what he's speaking to Gideon here and to the Israelites in general, because what they were doing, worshiping this god Baal, and all the horror that comes with that. If you get into that and you understand like the Baal worship, it was actually absolutely horrific. It wasn't good for them at all. And there's repercussions when we do this stuff. And so God confronts Gideon at this point, and he gives him a choice. Is he going to do things his own way and continue in the way that his people have been doing them, or is he going to do them in God's way? And we're going to read here verses 14 to 26. It lays this out. The Lord turned to him and he said, go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you? Go back to that slide for a second. This is incredible, actually. The Lord turned to him and he said, go in the strength you have. Keep trying to do it your own way. Keep trying to do it Gideon's way. How's that been working out for you? Even if he's sent. See, sometimes we're sent and we still try to do it in our own strength. I mean, we can accomplish some things in our own strength. But that lasting fruit, that comes when we're abiding, and that comes as the power of the Spirit moves through us. And so as we continue on here in verse 15, pardon me, my Lord, Gideon replied, but how can I save Israel? See, he knew. He knew what God was saying. How can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family. And the Lord answered, I will be there with you, and you will strike down the Midianites, leaving none alive. Gideon then replied, if now I have found favor in your eyes, give me a sign that it is really you talking to me. Please do not go away until I come back and bring my offering and set it before you. And the Lord said, I will wait until you return. Gideon went inside, prepared a young goat, and from an ephah of flour, he made bread without yeast. Putting the meat in a basket and his broth in a pot, he brought them out and offered them to him under the oak. the angel of God said to him, take the meat and the unleavened bread, place them on this rock, and pour out the broth. And Gideon did so. Then the angel of the Lord touched the meat and the unleavened bread, and with the tip of the staff that was in his hand, fire flared from the rock, consuming the meat and the bread, and the angel of the Lord disappeared. When Gideon realized that it was the angel of the Lord, he exclaimed, alas, sovereign Lord, I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face. But the Lord said to him, peace, do not be afraid. You're not going to die. So Gideon built an altar to the Lord there and called it, the Lord is peace. To this day it stands in Ophrah of the Abiezrites. That same night the Lord said to him, take the second bull from your father's herd, the one 7 years old, tear down your father's altar to Baal, and cut down the Asherah pole beside it. Then build a proper kind of altar to the Lord your God on top of this height, using the wood of the Asherah pole that you cut down. Offer the second bull as a burnt offering. It becomes very clear. The problem that Israel was facing at this time was they put up altars to false gods. But God, in his mercy and in his grace, gives Gideon an experience that will then lead the people to be in that right relationship with God once again. Over and over and over again, we see this. He gives the people, through his mercy, he gives the people a chance over and over and over again. And at the heart of this is so important, is that it all starts with an experience from God. See, what's going to happen here in a moment is that Gideon is going to go out and he's going to do this stuff. And the repercussions for what God has called him to do was death. The people want to kill him. All the people of his clan, they want to kill him at that point for tearing down the altar to Baal. Like, who did this? He tries to do it at night, comes out. Well, he does it at night, comes out secretively, and we'll read this here in a second. But the reality is this, that in order to do this really hard thing, in order to do this challenging task that God had set before him, and it's only going to get more difficult from here, that it starts with an experience, because through the experiences that we have with God, it increases and it builds our faith. Like, we can try to generate it. We can try to tell ourselves over and over again, have more faith, just have faith. That's not how it works. The faith actually comes through experience. My first real experience with God was on April 12th of 2021 when Jesus came into the room and he healed me. That increased my faith exponentially more than any other event through my Christian walk at that point for 22 years. It was experiential. And what it does through those moments is when things get challenging later on, when your father's people want to kill you, or God says, no, you're going to fight against them with only 300 people instead of the army that you just had. It gives you the faith for it because you know that God is actually there. And I mean, this comes on later. Like he's famous for fleecing God, right? Like, God, if you're really with us, then make this, put the do on this part, and then later on, like, if you're really with us, do it this way. But it's experiential in nature. Like, we kind of laugh about this thing with Gideon sometimes, like, oh, here's this guy, and he's got to test God and make sure that God's really there. Yeah, he does, because at the end of the day, he's going with 300 people against an army. And he wants to know that God is actually there and God has actually called him. And it's experiential. And as you go and you start to walk this stuff out and you see this more and more, when you see that first person healed, it increases your faith. When you see that first person that you pray for, they come back a few days later and say the cancer is gone, it increases your faith. When you actually see God in the room with you, it increases your faith. And this is actually how God set it up and how it's supposed to work, because the faith is a gift and the gift comes from him. But we can be proactive in seeking out those experiences with God, not just for the experience in and of itself, but that we would know him deeper, and that through those experiences, he increases our faith. And this is how we build faith as a people. And it's what God was doing here with Gideon. We're going to continue on here, just in verse 27. Put that up for me. So Gideon took 10 of his servants and did as the Lord told him. But because he was afraid of his family and the townspeople, he did it at night rather than in the daytime. He still did it. Like we think, oh, he went and tried to do it and tried to hide it at night. Come on, we all know this. Like that kid in the Marines 10 years ago, however long ago that was for me. You got a group of 10 people, someone's going to talk every time. We all know it. Like he was going to get found out. He's going to get found out from the beginning. And as the story progresses on, as you look at it here, they come out and they say, we know who did this. Gideon did it. And they say, now we got to kill him. We got to put him to death for what he's done to the altar of Baal. And his father comes up and he says, nah, let Baal defend himself. Why are you going to mess with my son? And through this encounter that they have, the people see that God is actually moving with Gideon, and it's the genesis of something much, much larger. See, this is the thing of how this works so many times. That God calls us into that one thing. He calls us through that one experience into something. And as we take the step and we say yes, he calls us into something deeper and deeper. And at the end of the day, God was building Gideon's faith so that when it came time to overthrow the Midianites, he would have the faith for it. And he would have the faith for it to do it with a small number of people that they couldn't take credit for it themselves, but that God would get all the glory. And it's beautiful. God comes in with an experience. Gideon responds. As Gideon responds, he calls him into a higher purpose, and God accomplishes his purposes, and he's glorified through it. And this is how this is supposed to work. And I believe this is how it's supposed to work for us day after day after day. But this is an important part of this story, and I skipped this on purpose. The one verse that I skipped was verse 12, so we're going to go back to that right now. In verse 12, it says this: when the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." He was of the least clan, and he was the lowest in his family. The Lord is with you, mighty warrior. Because the reality of the situation was this: that God didn't see Gideon as just being from the lowest clan and the lowest in his family. God saw the gold inside of Gideon. And he knew what was going to come. And he called it out. He called it out before he did anything else. And oftentimes, one of the things that we really need to do as a people is we need to do this with one another. Rather than pointing out the problems that everyone has. I mean, you can tell me all the problems that I have, but I already know. We can call it the gold in one another like God did here. He didn't see the least. He didn't smite or smote or whatever word you want to use. A guy who had an altar to Baal and an Asherah pole right outside of his house. The Lord is with you, mighty warrior. And he is. Remember when I first became a Christian, in the early years, I got it was 20 years ago, I got 2 prophetic words in my early years. One was about the Philippines, I didn't know at the time. Another word that I had was just very simple, that my heart was gold, but it was being refined in the fire and the dross was being taken off. And the woman that got that word for me saw God's heart for me way before I started to walk in it. And that's what we see with Gideon here. Way before he became the judge, the leader of the army, even before he became the one that was tearing down the Asherah pole and the altar to Baal in the middle of the night, God saw the gold inside of him, and he started to expose it and to call it out. And worship team, if you guys are ready, we have one or two more songs we're going to sing together. For each and every one of us in this room here, God has called us to something greater. God has called us to something that is truly impossible for us to do on our own. If we can do it on our own, then the vision isn't big enough. It's time to go after him and ask him for the vision from him that can only be accomplished through the power of his Spirit. It's understanding first that God has called you and that you have been called as a prince or princess in the kingdom, and the harvest is ready. You are meant to be a reaper in this kingdom. There is gold inside of you, and some of you don't see it yet. Some of you, like, it's there like a lump, and you know that it's there like a lump, and God's gonna heat it up. Because in the heating comes the refinement. The challenge for us today, I think, is this: just to ask God, Lord, what have I set up? What altars have I set up in my life, on purpose or not on purpose, that need to be taken down? I had some stuff that I was working on this week, and I poured some time into it. And I realized yesterday, you know what, I just spent a whole bunch of time on a distraction. And the distractions can easily become idols, and they can, even if they're good things, they can become something that we're pouring ourselves into that we shouldn't be pouring ourselves into. So my brain starts to think about all this stuff. Yeah, but I spent all this time on it, Lord. Good, set it aside, get rid of it. But Lord, what if I need this later on? You won't. Just set it aside, get rid of it. You know what I'm talking about, right? The stuff that the mind games that are the games that our minds play on us to try to convince us that it's okay to do something when it's not actually okay. Get rid of it. Ask the Lord what it is. And just get rid of it. Not as a fast. Not as something that, like, for a specific season like Lent. Like, really, just get rid of it. You don't need it. Because you've been called to so much more. And a lot of times, that stuff that is there that's a distraction or that we've set up an altar to keeps us from the refining process and going deeper in that relationship with God. And that's the biggest problem of all. And so that's just an encouragement to us. Whatever that might be in our lives, it's time to just get rid of it. And if you can't just get rid of it, it's something that's stuck there. That's why we have ministry sessions. That's why we have ministry teams. We're going to help you get that freedom that you need, that you can walk out this incredible purpose that God has. Amen?